Okay, you are connected to computer audio. And then I'll hook in my earphones. It's recording, so let's. Yeah, it's recording.
Know me, I can change that here today. I'm Tess Hoke. I'm a garden educator and real food mentor. And I call what I do yard food. I grow food in my yard. Hang on just a second. There we go. I just want to make sure everybody can hear me. Yes? Yes. Okay, good. So let me start that over again. I'm Tess Hoke. I'm a garden educator and real food mentor. And I call what I do yard food. I grow food in my yard, and I'm taking you along the garden path with me so that you can see what I'm up to and maybe do the same thing too, follow right along. Today's yard food session is called Early Greens. Believe it or not, it's time to get started outside. And one of the crops that I love to get going with early are greens. All those yummy things that end up on your salad plate, now is the time to start. And today we're going to cover a lot of things so that you know exactly what you need to do to get the hustle done. Sound good? All right then. Let's see, a couple rules of the road here before we get going. You notice that you've been muted as you've come in. Thank you so much. We love you. We love to hear from you. But just with Zoom, it just makes for a much better presentation. It just keeps all of the rattle out of it. I do want to open it up to a Q&A at the end. So just keep your little questions in your head. We will open that up, like I said, to a Q&A. And you'll have a chance to raise your hand icon, add to the conversation if you've got things to say, get clear on maybe some things that you want to get more information on. So I promise we'll revisit this and give you a chance to have the floor. So that's how we're going to do that. But most importantly today, I just want you to know that it is my goal to empower you with information so that you can grow your food. Now, whether you want to do that because you want to save money at the grocery store or because you want to have access to clean, healthy food to improve your health, or because you understand that this skill set, growing food, lies at the center of our strong and sustainable communities, whatever your reason, please take this information from me today. Learn it, practice it, share it with everyone that you love. And if you feel that it adds value to your life, consider donating for your class today. This is how I am making my way in the world, and it's how I am able to continue doing what I do for you. So win-win for everybody. Okay, let's get down to the reason we're here. And like I said, I'm outside on my patio today, and it's a time that I like to call green season. And here's what I like to do that. As a garden educator, one of the questions that I get asked the most this time of year is, why do my spinach greens always bolt? And why do my lettuce greens always turn bitter? And there is one little answer that usually is the reason. And that is that we start too late. That's why we're out here in the chilly of the morning talking about planting our greens. I want to make sure that you understand that if you are growing your food, and you may understand this, but let's just hit it again. If you're all about growing your food, if you're serious about feeding yourself from your growing spaces, whether that be your patio or your garden beds, we can't waste time and miss any of our growing windows. And one of the growing windows is now. Believe it or not, it's time to plant greens. I want to capitalize on this early season, and I want you to capitalize on it too. So this is how we're going to do it. We're going to start here on my porch where I'm at today, and I'm going to share with you the information that you're going to need to grow greens really, really good. But keep in mind that this information also applies out there in the garden beds. The reason I'm here on my patio, like I said, it's really early, and in my growing zone where I'm growing my food, it's still very cold at night. It's still freezing solid. I had a bucket of water out there and it froze solid the other night, so I know, dang, it's still chilly. But on my patio, things are a little bit different. I've got a microclimate going here because it's right next to my building. And so the nighttime temperatures tend not to get quite so frigid. Plus, The patio a little bit later is where I'm going to grow things like basil and beautiful flowing flowers, but that's a little bit later. Right now, my patio pots are empty. So I'm going to capitalize on that. I'm going to use this space and this early time to grow some greens. Got it? Okay, so let's check in here and let's talk quickly about who these greens are and why I am so excited to get them started on my patio today. Greens, that's a big word. It covers a lot of things, but let's just think about maybe some of them that you're familiar with and enjoy having on your salad plate. Things like spinach, arugula. I love bok choy and pak choys, but all those baby lettuce greens as well fit into the category of greens. And the thing about greens, the reason those spinaches are bolting early and those salad greens are going bitter too early is because our greens need to be seeded, they need to be germinated, grown, and harvested before it gets really hot out there in the garden. That's why we're starting now when it seems so cool. But I guarantee you, this little effort, this little early hustle on our part is going to pay off big later with beautiful, bountiful harvests of salad greens for our plates. So there's a few things we need to know in order to succeed here. And let's dive into them so we can get it all straight. First, not all greens need to be started this early. So who might those be and how would I be able to tell? Well, if you think about going to the grocery store, and I'm making this up on the hip, but I think this is going to help us. If you think about going to the grocery store and you go to the little green section and we find these little containers of baby greens and we look into them and we see things like spinach and baby lettuces of all sorts of shapes and colors. And a lot of times there's little bitty pieces of arugula and herbs and things like that. But that is sort of an indicator of what likes to be grown cool. All greens enjoy a cool weather, but not all greens need to be harvested early. And let's think about that too. Think about growing greens in your garden all summer long. What is often growing out there? In my garden, it's things like kale and chard and beet greens, plants that I harvest leaf by leaf by leaf and take in bundles into my kitchen. Things that grow all summer and well into the fall. It's those crops that I'm not so concerned about with today. What I'm concerned about with and what I'm going to start today, and I want to encourage you to think about starting too, are those early greens that aren't going to make it through that hot of the summer because they'll want to bolt and they'll want to go bitter. So let's think about those guys specifically for our efforts today. And that's who I've got for us to play with right now. A few weeks ago, I started in my little greenhouse space some greens. I started arugula and bok choy. And I've started some other things indoors, but we're going to start those same little guys outside. So what I have too is some plants to work with, and maybe you've got some lettuce starts as well, or if you've started some of your greens and you've got them in some pots, this is a good project for you. I've also got some seed packets, and remind me, I will include a replay for you guys because you're sweet peas, and I'm going to include a link where you can find some really great green seeds if you're still looking. But I've got a few little seed packets here today that I'm going to plant with you. One of them is some gourmet baby greens, and another one is a smoothie mix. I don't know about you, but I love a smoothie, and I'm going to grow some greens on my porch, just like that lickety split, but we're going to get to that. So in addition to plants, we're going to need a few little simple things. One of those little guys is a pot. Now here's a little trick that I'm going to share with you, and you can just watch me go along, and maybe this is going to apply to you as well. But I have these really cool big pots on my patio, but I don't want to fill them completely with soil because that's a lot of soil. But what I'm going to do is find a much smaller container, something with a shorter root base, something I don't have to fill quite so much soil in. And I'm going to just put those inside of my pots when I'm done so that I can have this beautiful look on my patio but not have so much soil inside of my container. So one of the things that I love about growing greens on my porch is I can use pretty much anything in order to plant them in. All I've got to have is some drainage at the bottom and just room for those roots to grow in. I don't need a very deep pot, like I said. I can actually use a quite shallow little bowl or pot, as long as it's got drainage, and plant and grow my greens quite successfully. So that's what I've got here, and this is where we're going to start. I've got just a black nursery pot that's not very deep. It's less than, it's about 6 or 8 inches, not too deep at all. So seek out what you've got. Check out your tool shed, see what you've got. Maybe you've got some pots on your patio already that are just empty, but anything's going to work. So I've filled this with soil, and here's the most important part to grow successful greens. Our greens love, and I mean, they love rich soil. So we've got to come up with soil in this pot that is full of organic, luscious material for them to grow in. Now, what I'm using is some compost that I took out of my compost bin last fall. It was all done. It had broken all the organic pieces down, and it was beautiful. It sat outside over the winter and thawed in the early spring sunshine, and now it's ready to plant. So it's got a lot of vavoom in it already, but I want to make sure that my greens have plenty of vavoom. So I'm going to add a fertilizer to this just to make sure that they've got enough juice to go on to give me a big luscious crop of greens. Now you can use anything as far as a fertilizer to add to your soil that you want. I like to use organic fertilizers, and I'll tell you why. Everything that your plant absorbs from the soil and makes its little body out of is going to end up in the food that it creates. In this instance, since we are growing greens and we're going to be eating the leaves of the greens, all of the fertilizer and anything that existed inside of that soil is going to be absorbed and made part of in those leaves, which means that when you and I harvest those leaves and consume them, all of that is going to become part of us. And I am super concerned about chemicals in my food, so I always reach for organic. You get to decide there, but golly, I only got one of these suits to wear through my life, and I'm going to take the best care of it I can. So I've got some Dr. Earth organic fertilizer. And always do me a favor, read the instructions on the back of the packet and follow the application rates, because I've made this mistake myself, thinking, more is always better, but not so. You can burn and over fertilize quite easily and do your little plants a disservice. Now I'm just going to reach in here and grab a couple handfuls, because I read on the back of my packet and it said I need 1/2 of a cup for about a 5-gallon container. So I've grabbed a couple handfuls that I think is just about 1/2 of a cup, and I'm going to mix it into this soil so that it's mixed in well. And when my little babies start to germinate and grow, they'll have access to yummy, delicious food that's both in this compost and I've just added. Now let's talk a little bit more about soil before we move on to the next part. And this is super important when you put soil into a pot. Let's say that we've been working on our soil in our garden beds for quite some time, and we're going to give ourselves a gold star, right? Because we've worked hard and that soil out there is really, really fertile. It's beautiful, it's loamy, and plants out there in the garden grow well. But that's not the appropriate soil to use for your container. When you take regular garden soil and you put it in a container, it tends to compact and turn into a harder brick sort of thing than this loamy material that comes often from the compost pile or a bagged material. So the garden soil, although it works well in the garden, is not a good choice for garden pots. And then let's look at those bagged products that we can get. Here's something to consider as well. There's a whole spectrum of qualities of soil. Now, I can't tell you which brand and which variety you should get, but I can tell you what to think about as you make your choices. Again, I always try to reach for something that's organic because here is how the potting soil industry works. I used to have a garden shop and buy commercial grade produced potting soils. And so I know this information is correct. Here's how things work. All across this beautiful land, in our cities and communities, often we have garbage pickup, right? They pick up your garbage, they pick up your recycle, they also pick up your yard waste. And this yard waste is taken to refuse centers and it is put in compost facilities and it is sold to the potting soil industry. But we have to think about, well, what is going into that refuse in the first place? And what goes into it oftentimes is people's yard waste that has been sprayed with chemicals. There's also medical waste that goes in sometimes and a lot of other things that is worrisome. So giving your really good scrutiny and check to the quality that you are purchasing in a garden bagged potting soil, I really do believe is worth your effort. I care about you and I just want you to be aware of information that often isn't shared just in the general public. So know that potting soil can have a lot of worrisome ingredients in it. So just be prepared, just be aware and think wisely about the product that you're purchasing for your food products. Because remember, what goes into the soil is absorbed to the plant and goes into you and into your little self. So potting soil, super important. So like I said, we've got a container, we filled it with soil and we fertilized it. Now what we need to do is make a wise choice on what kind of seeds or plants we want to put in. Well, this little guy is going to start, I'm going to start with these little fellows that I started in my windowsill, oh golly, a few short weeks ago. Now, if you've been with me in any of our seed starting classes, maybe you got these little fellows too. And maybe you're going to recognize what I often share is that it's time to pot up, time to move them either into a bigger pot or plant them out when we begin to see their first set of true leaves emerge. And that's what's happening in these little guys, which are bok choys. They're a little miniature Asian green that I love. And I've also learned they love me if I plant them in the cool of the spring. So I potted them. Well, I was very excited about spring when I put all of the seeds in here. So I have a lot of them in a cell. And I'm just gently gonna say, come on, little guys, we're gonna have fun at our party, but I need you to let go of your friends. We're gonna have more space to grow and we're gonna get to that. Now, that brings up a really good question. Okay, I've got some seedlings. How close together? How far apart should I plant them to get big, luscious greens? Well, again, if you've been with me in some seed starting classes, you will know that the back of our seed packet has an encyclopedia of information that we can refer to. And I guarantee you that the answer to that question, how far apart should I plant my bok choy seedlings, is right there on that packet. But I planted these before, and so I kind of know how big they'll get. And so how far apart I'm going to plant them. So I'm going to separate these guys and plant them about 6 inches apart. I'm just going to gently make a little hole and tuck their little roots in and just gently bring that soil up around them. Now, the thing about any early green on your porch is that you can consume them, you can eat them really at any stage of their growth. It's totally up to you. A lot of times when I grow greens on my porch early, I can't quite get out to my garden bed yet because, well, I just haven't gotten there and the nights are still cold, like I said. So maybe in another week or two, I'll go out to my garden bed and seed some more greens. And maybe it's out in my garden bed that I'll let those greens go to mature size. Like if I was growing lettuce, I'll let that head of lettuce grow to its mature size head. But here in my garden pots on the patio, I don't need to do that. It's early. I'm going to have lots of time to grow lots of greens. So I might just grow these as, halfway, however I'm feeling at the time. whatever I'm cooking for dinner and whatever I need, sometimes I just slip out to the patio and harvest them young and early. But you can see that there is some little bok choy seedlings in a pot, ready to go. And why are they so excited now about their life? Because it's cool outside. And that's what these little fellows need, is a cool temperature. But again, it's not going to freeze at night next to my house. So they're going to be quite happy growing right here. I need to just give them a little bit of water to douse them in. And then there's one more really, really, really important part that I need to consider. Let's just stick these inside of here. See how that works? A black nursery pot, not so beautiful, but my beautiful little black gray pot that I love so much is now growing greens, just like that. Later, this pot is going to grow maybe petunias or basil. I'm not really sure yet, but right now I'm taking advantage of this early cool weather season, green season, and I'm going to grow some greens. So there's that. Now, I have a little trick I want to share with you for my next pot. Let's plant some seeds next, and let's talk about some creative ways that we can do that. Here is an old recycled pot. Not much to talk about, right? But we're going to fix that. I didn't want to like toss it completely out because, you know, it's nice to recycle and use things again, and I'm sure that I can get some more use out of this. And we're going to stick it inside of a pot, so we're not going to notice it so much. But this little guy is kind of deep. He's about 12 inches deep. And I know my little greens don't need a big, huge root area, and they're going to be growing quick and fast, and I'm going to harvest them young as baby greens. So I don't need so much root structure. I don't need so much potting soil. So think about this for a little trick. Here's just a little cardboard box. It's going to occupy space in the bottom of my pot and not need so much soil to cover. So I'm just going to stick that down in there, and I'm going to fill it with some, again, this is a quality soil that I made myself. I composted quite a while. I live in a dry area that freezes in the winter. So making compost in my neck of the woods takes a lot of time and effort. But that's okay. So I'm going to fill this container with soil. And I'm thinking in this pot, I'm going to plant some baby greens. Now, what are baby greens? Well, baby greens are literally just that. They're babies of greens. Makes sense, right? But that means that I'm not going to grow them into a mature sized plant. I'm going to harvest them when they're young and tender and baby. But it's not going to take quite so much soil. Excuse me. Let's fill this up. It's not going to take quite so much soil because I put that little cardboard box in there. Now, maybe later in the season, if I'm going to grow something else in this pot, I'll take that box out. But right now, I'm not so worried about that. It's just occupying space and making my job a lot easier. All right, so I'm going to plant in here some gourmet baby greens. Now, like I said, guys, all you need to know about growing this particular grouping of baby greens is on the back of the seed packet. It is the most underutilized piece of information we as home gardeners have. So do yourself a favor. I do myself this favor all the time, and just sort of refresh yourself. I learn a lot about things that I thought I already knew, but it'll really give you a tutorial on just what it is you've got in this packet and how long to expect it before it germinates and all that sort of information. So I've got my soil up. Let's not ever forget this. I'm going to add the fertilizer. Again, this product is going to call for a half of a cup for a 5-gallon container. I've got a little bit less than 5 gallons in there. So I'm going to put less than my half of a cup. And I'm just going to mix that in. And from the compost pile, there's still a few little things, but we don't need them in there. Just take them out, put them in the next round of compost, and there we go. Okay, now this time, we're gonna do something a little bit different. These are baby greens, and I'm gonna seed them. But let's think about in a pot that we plan to harvest early, how we can seed them. Gee, should I plant them in some little rows? No. Maybe a better way to do it is to seed these little guys all over the top of this soil. And then we've got, let's envision ourselves a couple short weeks later down the road, we've got an entire flush of baby greens coming, at which time we can harvest them in a couple different ways. We can harvest them by taking into our kitchen something called thinnings. We can just go through our big luscious pot of greens and gently pull out the ones that are the largest. I like to just go every day when I'm using this technique and pull out from the pot the largest greens that I need for that day, which does a very important thing. It makes more room for all of the other little guys growing and gives them an opportunity to grow even bigger, so that the next day I can come out, thin some more out, make even more room for those plants that I leave behind, so that the following day when I come out, they're even bigger. That works extremely well if you're not looking for a big, huge amount at one time. Now, let's pretend that we can have all of our friends over for dinner. It's been so long since I've done that. And I need to make a big green salad for all of my guests. So I can take my scissors. I've got this luscious crop of greens growing. I haven't thinned them yet. And I can do this amazing little guy called cut and come again. Baby greens, I can cut them all down, cut it all down, cut them all down, put them in my colander, take them into my kitchen, water this again, and I'll get another flush of growth on those same greens so that I can harvest them that way again. So you see, there's some creative ways that we can take advantage of these patio pots growing early greens. So I've got quite a few in my hand. I want to make sure that I get a nice flush. Not too much, but I want to make sure that I cover this soil with plenty of seeds so that I've got plenty of greens coming at me. I'm probably going to use this pot to do the cut and come again method. I know that I've got some other greens up there that I can just sort of dabble away with, pull them up as they come ready. But I want to be able to have a lot of greens at once, just in case I can invite all my buddies over for a yummy dinner. That's coming in our future, I hope. I'm just sort of pressing these down into the soil. Not too much. I know it looked like I scattered a few, but there's a few. There's quite a few in there, but I'm not worried about that because I'm going to thin them out as they come up. Let's put those back. And I just press this. Now we can do one of two things here. I'm out of soil there, so we're going to do it this way. Just going to press them down, which means that these little lettuces are anchored in this soil. I'm going to water them in. Now, this soil looks like it's kind of dry a little bit, so we're just going to do this for a minute. A little bit there, that'll soak in. Let's give it a little bit more. I just don't want to end up, give it a little bit more. But I do want to cover one little point here that's super, super important when you're growing greens on your patio. The thing that I love most about growing in pots is that I can move them wherever I need to. And here's a little trick to apply on your patio when you're growing your greens. I'm stepped out here this morning and I'm in a corner that gets afternoon sun, not all that morning sun. And so it's not like a lot of sunshine during the day. I need to make sure that my greens are going to get plenty of sunshine now when the days are cool and the nights are that as well. So I'm going to be able to move these pots to a sunnier spot on my patio while they're germinating and growing. And this comes in super handy because here's how this works. As the spring, we march along springtime, the days get warmer, the nights get warmer. And then on the patio, some of these days gets really, really warm. Well, let's go back to the beginning where we talked about why does my spinach bolt and why do my lettuce plants tend to go bitter? That is because they're getting too warm oftentimes, or they're getting too warm and they're getting too dry in between. We want to make sure that our greens remain moist as well, that they don't make swings between dry and moist. But on the patio, that's critical as the days begin to warm up. So I'm going to make sure that my patio pots get arranged nicely on my patio here in a place where they get sunshine for most of the day. But as the season progresses, I'm going to think, I need to make sure that my greens aren't getting too warm, and I'm going to maybe rearrange them on my patio and put them in a place where they get protected from maybe that hot afternoon sun. See what I'm saying there? Our greens have needs. One of their needs is to grow in the cool of the spring. But also one of their needs is to stay moist and out of really, really warm sunshine. That's why we're starting green season early and not waiting until our warm weather crops are ready to go out in the garden. We want to take advantage of the cool weather so that our greens get what they need. And what our greens need, our baby greens, our spinach, our arugula, our bok choy, is cool, moist conditions. Easy to do now on the patio, easy to do now out there in the garden, but not so easy to do as it begins to really warm up and get closer into the midst of summer. So that's why I'm really excited about using greens on my patio now. It's super easy. It fits all the conditions these plants are looking for, cool and moist. But later on in the garden, things are going to change. It's going to get kind of difficult out there for greens. There are some things that we can do about that, and let's talk about that in a second. But let's just make sure that we capitalize. Again, if we're serious about growing our food, if we don't want to miss out on any of our growing windows, then let's not. Let's capitalize on this early part of the spring season. Let's call it green season, and let's get started now with our greens. Okay, so here's this yummy pot, all planted, lettuce seeds in there, ready to go. And we're just going to put it inside of this pot. There we go. I love this old cool tub. He's really cool. And now I don't even see the unsightly look of my little pot there. He's stuck inside of there. There's that cardboard box, so I didn't need to use quite so much potting soil. And now my lettuces can germinate there and grow. Remember, they're going to grow in a big flush, and I'm going to harvest them all at one time and feed everybody I love fresh, luscious greens. You can do the same thing too. All right, let's talk a minute before we get into the Q&A session. And I really, really hope that that you guys can bring to the table today just any questions you have. It's time to really get down, get serious about growing food. So any question on the table today really works. But let's say that you really don't have a patio spot, or you're not interested in growing on your porch. Totally cool. And you've got growing beds ready to go. If they're not ready, I would suggest hustle, because like I said, it's green season. But I also said it's still cold. If you're growing in my growing zone here, it's still cold at night, which means temperatures can freeze, which means our little baby greens may not feel so good the next morning. So I've got a product I want to share with you. This product works now to keep the cool off, to keep the freezes off of them. And it works on the other end of the season to keep the hot sun off too. This is a little product called Remacloth. Remacloth is a lightweight polyspun material. And why it works so well, it's also called floating row cover. But why it works so well, it's light and drapey, and you just put it over your garden plants and weigh it down with stones or boards or whatever you've got. But why it works so well is This polyspun material designed for plants keeps the frost off of your plants. So you can really change the growing zone under here by quite a bit when you're trying to do things like keep that nighttime temperature freeze from really hitting your plants and doing them in. So I like to use this to cover my greens out in the garden bed early this time of year. It also works just the same on the other end of summer. Maybe we're now in the heat of it. Tomatoes are in the garden, the peppers are growing, the eggplant is looking good, but my greens aren't looking so good. And that's because we now know our greens want cool, moist conditions. How can we create that? That's where we're going to do our best to think about microclimates. That's what this patio is in the other end of the season. It's early, it's a microclimate. It's providing warmer temperatures at a time when those night times get way too cold. But you can use this remake cloth at the other end, like I said. So let's pretend that you're out in your garden and it's now May. And things are starting to get really warm and you're kind of thinking, maybe it's going to be a little too late to plant another round of lettuce or spinach or bok choy or some of those other greens that you're really, really wanting to have. Think about using remake cloth as a cover to grow your plants under, because what this is going to do is provide shade for them. It's going to give them a microclimate that's slightly cooler than the outside temperature. Now, there's some other things that you can do to try to create cooler conditions in the garden for your greens as the temperatures warm up. There is, in all likelihood, going to come a time when it really has just gotten too warm in the garden to grow nice, luscious lettuce. But I'm a girl who loves lettuce all year long, and I figured out a couple ways, and I want to share them with you, that you can create little microclimates as the season gets warm down the road. One of them is, if I know that my lettuce or my greens want cool, moist temperatures, I can look around my garden space and I can creatively come up with some of those spaces by utilizing maybe the shady side of a garden row that's growing something tall that casts a shadow onto a garden bed in the afternoon, thereby creating a cooler growing condition, cooler soil temperatures that I can squeak out another round of lettuce. I've grown quick, fast baby greens under my tomato plants in June into July, just because I didn't want to get done with salad greens quite so early. Always looking around your growing spaces for where you've got cool, moist conditions. You can get creative. You can just fly by the seat of your pants. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but it gives you an idea that the windows, this cool, moist window we have in spring, we can do our best to create that for our greens in the garden to the best of our ability. So see what you can come up with. At least you've got an idea now that green season happens early. It happens when it's cool. And we can extend that season if we can get creative and figure out in our garden space where we can create some sort of cool, moist condition. Now, granted, growing them in the shade of another plant sounds good, but our lettuces are going to need some sunshine. So think about how they can get that sunshine in the morning and capitalize on the shade that something else is casting in the afternoon. I've used that a million times and it works really good. I hope that you can use it too. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, how you can use your patios to get started today growing some fresh early greens. Like I said, these tips, this information is exactly what you'll need to do out in your garden rows to get greens going as well. Just providing a little bit of attention to them if you're planting out by covering them at night, making sure they don't get too cold and freeze and sort of knock your efforts back to 0.0. So we are going to open it up to a Q&A. I really hope that you've got some questions to ask, because I want to make sure that you're super clear on that. And I want to do that because I really want to inspire you and give you whatever information I've experienced and learned over my 25 years of gardening in my backyard, so that you can apply that without needing to figure it out for yourself. So use me today as an encyclopedia if you want to, and let's get down and ask some questions. We're going to do that. We have Darlene, our sweet little moderator, here today. And in order to get recognized, what I'd like you to do is raise your hand icon if you can figure out where that's at. And if you can't, you can just type in the chat and we can recognize you. But one by one, we'll unmute you, give you the floor, and give you a chance to ask questions. Maybe make comments and share with us what you've discovered, what you've found is working in your garden space. Because the more of us here at this garden party, figuring it out together really, really works. And I'm not the only one with all of the answers. So I learn from you as well. So if you've got any questions, go ahead and raise your hand icon there, and we'll get to that. And while we're waiting for our first little participant, I just also wanted to touch again on making really smart decisions about planting early greens. Like I said, greens, that whole array of green little leaf plants love to grow in the cool of the spring. But things like chard and kale do well all summer long and into the fall. So if you're using your patio pots to start early rounds of lettuce and bok choy or arugula, another really yum favorite that loves to grow early in the spring, think about using this shoulder season, this early spring season, to grow those greens that really, really must grow now. And save your time and effort, because there's a lot to be done in the garden if you're all about growing your food. And save your time and effort to put in your kale and your chard maybe a little bit later. You might have more energy and more time in your day than I do and can get a lot more done, hence go for it. But I like to just sort of get my act together, get these early greens going, because I know, for example, a luscious crop of spinach has to get in the ground now. I don't want to miss it. And I know I've still got a window of time to get some other crops in the ground, especially kale. So I'm going to hang tight with my kale and plant it out a little bit later in the garden. So that's a tip for you. If it works, great. Just trying to strategize. There's a lot of garden beds in my world to get planted, and there's a lot of things to be done. But what can't wait is the early greens, and now is the time. I just really want to stress that. Green season is now, and so now is when we need to capitalize on that. Who might have something that they want to ask and get clear on? Who might have some greens growing in their windowsill? Questions about that? I know that I've started a bunch of them, and I've got some more patio pots I need to fill. This is some baby arugula. And I'm just thinking now that maybe I've got a garden bed I can hustle and get them into the ground for. Oh, here's another good thing I want to mention to you guys. Think about in your garden rows, as you're getting out there planting your lettuces, your greens this season, think about allowing at least a couple of them to bolt and go to seed. And here's why. Becoming a seed saver is really at the center of becoming a home gardener. Now, I don't know about you, but I've experienced an inability to get garden seeds in these last couple of years in a way that I've never experienced before. And I want to make sure that I and you always have access to garden seeds. Without our seeds, we can't grow the garden. And it's super simple to grow our lettuce seeds if we think about a couple things. One, when you're choosing your garden seeds, I like to always choose open pollinated heirloom seeds, because that means that I can save those seeds and those seeds will come true. That means that the mother plant that I saved them for, let's say it was a butter crunch lettuce, that I'll save those seeds, plant them, because it's open pollinated, it will come true to itself. It will reproduce those genetics exactly as the mother plant was. And so I'll know I'll be able to plant those seeds and get butter crunch lettuce next season. Letting lettuces and arugulas and cilantros and all of those fresh greens, letting them go to seed also does another very important, critical thing in your garden ecosystem. And what that does is it allows nectar and food for all of the pollinators. So make sure, if you want to become a seed saver, if you're considering pollinators in your garden, that you let some of those go to seed. Do we have a question?
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I was wondering, our yard is surrounded by tall trees, and so we don't really get full day sun. So there were some garden beds when we moved in, and we didn't have great luck because of the sun. And wondering about the microgreens, what we should do if we can't get full day sun.
Okay. Well, you're at the right party, okay? Because the beautiful thing about greens is they don't have to have full day sun. Now, if you're hoping in this semi-shaded garden space to grow big luscious tomatoes or peppers, things that need a lot of sun, then maybe you're going to have to get creative and figure out where else you'll be able to grow those. But you've got a space totally usable. So what can we grow in those garden spaces that you've got that doesn't need full sun? Little research on your part, but let's shoot from the hip here. Greens is one of them. Lettuces. It's early now, right? And so maybe these spaces in your garden is getting sunshine, a little sunshine.
Yeah, yeah, that definitely changes through the year where the sun is. So.
Yes, and definitely throughout the year, does it get a little shadier at times?
Yeah, depending where we are in the, yeah.
Okay, so one of the things that I like to suggest to gardeners is maybe this is a great year to experiment, but also to pay really close attention. For you as a gardener to learn the language of what's happening in your garden space. Where in April the shadows fall, where in April the most sun is happening in these garden beds, where in July the deep shade happens, and where in August you get sunshine. Pay attention this year as you go through a garden season and learn. And a lot of times it's just by, trying things and paying attention and recreating and using your, what doesn't work as an educational tool to teach you what will work. But I'm excited for you because you've got some semi-shaded beds, which might allow you to grow your fresh greens in a way throughout the entire season that I'm not able to do in my garden in the full sun. So it's not a loss. It's just that you're going to be able to use your garden beds differently than maybe I am because I've got full sun. Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
So as you're getting excited and making your list about what you want to grow in your garden, do a little research and find out what of those crops can do well without full sunshine, or that grow early in the spring when you do have more sunshine in those garden beds. Maybe you'll have enough because the next class we're going to do together, we're going to get to planting peas and some of the other early crops that can go in starting very soon. And maybe your garden beds are going to be able to accommodate some of that. But I really, really encourage you, it's not the end of the world. It's not bad. It's just that your beds are different than my beds. I've got full sun, you don't, but you've got the ability to grow maybe some things that I don't. And fresh greens maybe throughout your entire season is one of them you're going to be able to do. So that could be a positive.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, we love peas.
Yeah, right on. So so check back in for our next class, but use this year to really, get a journal together, do whatever it is that you do, but pay attention. Watch your garden this year. Watch the sun, watch the season move through your garden beds so that you've got information to use so you can make wise choices moving forward. And also use this, I really encourage you, use this year as an experiment. Hey, I think I'll try this. Maybe I've got enough sunshine for this. It could work, it couldn't work. But just learning from that whole process, is a win on your part. So I really encourage you, don't think it's the end of the world. Don't feel like it's not enough. You're just going to be able to grow things at a different time than I am. So yay. I'll come to your house for fresh salad greens.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So let's
Hi.
see. Yeah,
Can you hear me?
I hear you.
Hi, this is Diane up in Mazama. Thank you for getting me in on the Zoom. I'm sorry your previous emails were going to my spam, but I fixed that.
Oh, yay.
Sorry. It's still much colder up here in Mazama, and we still have a lot of snow on the ground.
Yep.
So I had two questions. Is it too early to put greens on my deck if I have enough sun? And then in terms of the temperature gradient, when could I actually start putting some of these things outside?
Right.
And how much do I have to allow for that?
Okay. So you live at the far end of the spectrum. You live where it's coldest the longest and where winter comes early, right? And so you're going to need to incorporate this information. It's all the same information for you. It just may need to be stalled a little bit. But you said something that really perked my ears, and that is you've got a patio space that's in full sun. So up against the structure is the microclimate where it's not going to get quite so cold at night. And if you've got pots or some containers that you can keep a really close eye on, why not get started now on your patio? It might be a little bit of time before you can get out to your garden beds, just because it may still be frozen and snow and all of that, and colder temperatures at night. But sure, if it was me and I was living where you live, I would sure give it a start and get started. Gather your pots together, gather fertilizer and soil, gather your seeds. Perhaps you want to start in your windowsill some of your greens. If you're going to grow bok choy, or you're going to grow, I don't know, some lettuces that you love, you could start some of those in your window for the garden beds a little bit later. This will have, give them a couple, 3 weeks to start growing. Maybe then some of your early garden beds will be ready. But I would sure encourage you to use your patio now, because your little patio in the sun, in the full sun, is going to warm up during the day and radiate some of that heat out at night, and probably keep your temperatures at a zone that your plants are going to be fine. But here also, if you gather together, I always have some of this in my tool shed because it's got so many uses, this remake cloth, this floating row cover. And then I could just walk out onto my patio if I lived where you do, or even where I live. There's a lot of cold nights still coming. And if I pay attention, one of my favorite friends this time of year is the weatherman. And I always check in with the nightly weatherman just to see what my nighttime temperatures are suggested. And if they are suggesting that it's going to dip way down cold, I might reach for my remake cloth and then just gently drape it over my patio pots, just to give them a little extra protection during the night. So there's a lot of creative ways that we can solve the issues of climate. But I would really encourage you to get started. And I'm encouraging you because you've said you've got a sunny, warm patio. And that patio is going to be a microclimate that is warmer during the day at this cool time of the year and warmer at night. So try it, see how it works out. But you're right, your garden beds are probably just a little ways away. But one of the biggest mistakes so many of us make, and I have made this a million times in my garden career as well, is waiting too late out in the garden before we start to plant our greens. Those little guys need to get started early. So don't wait too late. Don't wait until it's time to plant tomatoes to plant greens, because then we've wasted so much of our green season.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Tess, I have a question. It's not so much about greens, but it's about containers. I have some large containers that I've grown pretty much always flowers in. But last year I tried to grow cucumbers and they just didn't do well. What should I do to make the soil better?
Okay.
Like how much new stuff do I need to put in and what should I put in? And
Right.
it's about 2 feet, almost 2 feet deep of soil and about 2 feet wide.
Okay.
So they're pretty big.
Okay, yeah, so they're pretty big. So let's think about that. and foremost, if we're going to grow food crops need rich soil. They just really do. But you mentioned that last year you grew cucumbers. And so let's just use that as an example. I'm sure you've got ideas of different things this year, but let's just use the cucumbers for example. So if you had a patio pot that was 2 feet deep and you filled that entire thing with soil, your cucumber roots are not going to need all of that 2 feet of soil to grow. They really don't. They only need maybe the first, I don't know, 6 or 8 inches, probably not even that. But what they do need is rich soil. So why not, you could do one of two things. You could fill that all with soil if you want, but if it was me, I would find an alternative pot like this one. I don't know if you saw us, but it's just about 8 inches deep, plenty for a cucumber, plenty for greens, plenty for some of those other things we like to grow on the patio. And I would do my best to find the best possible soil that I could. Not for my garden, again, because that's going to compact in a pot. My experience over the years is it just doesn't function the way it does in the garden. So I've grown successfully, and you could too, in compost. Compost either out of a bag, and again, I always choose organic, or compost that I've made myself out of my garden bed and it's ready to go. It's rich, it's fertile, it's loose and loamy, and that's what our vegetables love. And to that, because you're growing your vegetable on your patio and you're growing it throughout the entire season, more than just a few short weeks, you want to make sure that you feed that cucumber in that pot more than just once. It's going to need to be fed a few times throughout the growing season. Remember, in order to get big, beautiful, luscious vegetables, we have to start with the soil. We have to feed the soil so the soil can feed our plants, and then our plants can feed us. So I encourage you, don't give up. You haven't, made any mistakes. There's just maybe some tweaks that we can make to get you more successful. And also think about the plants that you want to grow, the vegetables that you're hoping to grow in your patio this year, all season long. The patio, remember, it's a microclimate. It's warmer now, which is great for greens, but that means that it's going to be warmer later, which may not be that good for cucumbers. Now, cucumbers, in my experience, they appreciate when the days get super, super hot. In my garden, they really appreciate somewhere where they're growing in partial shade, which now gives us ideas. If we don't have full sun, gee, I could grow some cucumbers and maybe make the best of that. So as you're thinking about which garden crops you want to grow on your patio pots, think about that soil, but also think about the conditions that your patio is going to offer those plants later in the season. And are those conditions the same conditions that the vegetables you're hoping to grow and thrive are asking for from you? Does that help?
Sorry, I had to unmute. Yes, that helps a lot. I hadn't really even thought about that. I just assumed more sun is better, but you're right. Maybe that's why the cucumbers didn't do so well. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and so it's just a suggestion for you. But one of the things that I've really learned over the years, and I love to share with my students, is that there is a language that is spoken in the garden. And I don't mean a verbal language. I mean that you and I, as gardeners, as human beings walking into the garden, there is a language that is being spoken, and we need to learn to speak it. And how we do that is to make ourselves available to the information that's around us. Pay attention, listen, feel. Which way are those winds coming from? Are they biting winds in the spring? Do they blow my plants over? Are there hatches of insects? And what does that mean? Does that mean there's moisture there in the ground? Does it mean that I have an invasive insect problem? Where does the sun shine in my garden the brightest in April? Where does that sun shine the hottest in July? What crops ask for partial shade? What crops ask to be planted early in the season? And what crops need my attention more than other crops? Do you see what I'm saying? The plants will speak to us by showing you vibrancy or non. The garden will speak to you in these ways I've just described. And it is our job, if we want to create bountiful spaces in our garden, to learn to interpret that information. And that's basically what we are doing, is we are interpreting it. We've never been taught to do that. It's a skill that we need to learn. And so start to do that. I am always working on honing that skill. Still, 25 years later, I find insects that I've never seen in my life. I learn things and have thoughts and revelations that I've never had in my entire time on planet Earth. And that's what I really want to share with you guys today, is how to do that, how to open yourself up to the information that exists in the garden so that you can take it in, so that you yourself can learn to interpret that and not need me anymore. That would be the height of my success, is to do a Zoom class and have nobody show up because everybody is speaking the language of the garden. That's success. And that's what I'm hoping to impart with you today. Learn from your garden. Never think that you're going to make a mistake or something was a loss. It never is, because you'll always learn something from it. So I really encourage you to try again, apply some of these things we've talked about today and just keep on learning. It's really a beautiful thing and warms my heart to see you all here today.
That's lovely. Thank you. Thanks.
You're welcome.
All right, we have another question from Linda.
Hi, Tess. I was just wondering, on the seeds you planted today, how long will it be before you expect you can get some harvest from it?
Good question. Very good question. So, like I said, the back of the seed packet has a lot of really good information. Hang on, I'm going to put on my glasses so I can read it, and let's interpret a little of it and see how we can figure that question out. The back of the seed packet is going to tell me how many days before these little guys, these seeds that I planted, emerge. And this one says 5 to 14 days. So that's a couple weeks already, okay? So you keep track. That's 14 days, 2 weeks. And then it's going to have on here days to maturity. Maturity, which is another 28 days. So count that up for us. What do we got? 2 weeks, 6 weeks, right? But maturity, I don't want maturity when it comes to greens means a full size head of lettuce, but I don't want to wait that long. I'm going to harvest them when they're in their baby stage. What is the baby stage? Literally, at whatever stage you decide it's time that their leaves are big enough for you to cut them in or pull them out and take them into your kitchen. So I know it's going to take probably a couple weeks before they're up and growing. And then just depending, I have gone out and thinned these because I planted them so thickly. I'm going to come out and thin them out just so that I make room for the other guys to grow a little bit bigger. But I'm going to take those thinnings from the time they're, I don't know, maybe an inch big until maybe 2 inches. And all of those I'm going to take into the kitchen, chop off their little dirty roots and put them into my salad plate or recipe that I've got going. So probably not 28 days to maturity plus 14 days from emergence. I'm just probably going to give them, I'm guessing, about 3 to 4 weeks. I'm going to be eating something out of this pot, and 4 weeks for sure. I'm going to give them a haircut and take a lot of them into my kitchen. So that's what I'm expecting with these greens. And I'm going to grow them early like that because out in my garden bed, I've also got room. And this is my strategy, and everybody has a whole different strategy and a different lifestyle. But my strategy is I want some early greens on my patio, but I also want these big luscious heads of lettuce that I love to do other things with. And so I'm going to grow my lettuce into full-size heads further out in my garden and just use these right outside my patio for baby greens. The nice thing about growing greens on my patio here too is they're right outside my door. And one of the things that I've learned about growing food in my yard is I'm chopping away, it's dinner time. Gee, everybody's going to be sitting down in 20 minutes. I need to get all this done. Shoot, I wish I had grabbed that big hunk of lettuce or those bok choys that were ready to go when I was up in the garden. I don't have time now, so I'll go get it tomorrow. I find that when I've got yummy stuff growing right outside my patio, I'm way more likely to reach outside and grab just a sprig of this or a handful of that and make sure that it gets into my dinner. So I love that about growing my greens early on my porch. And it works really well too later on in the season when things are warm. I always grow fresh parsley and basil right outside my door for that very reason, because I'm really going to use it just in the nick of time if it's right there and I don't have to go on a journey and find it in the garden. So see if that applies. And hopefully that answers the question about how long it's going to take before we're expecting some fresh return from our effort here.
Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So who's excited about growing greens today? I know I am. I'm really excited, and I'm excited to see what you guys are going to come up with too. Does anybody have any other questions? Any other issues in the garden? Questions about what else we can get started early like this, or things that you'd just like to throw into the middle of the conversation because you've had experience and like to add that to what we're talking about?
I had a question just about birds and critters. If we put stuff on, we have a covered deck, but we have some planters that hang over. If we started things out there, would the critters and birds eat them, or should we cover them with that fabric?
Well, you have hit on something very important. You and I are not the only one out there looking for lunch, right? So critters, chipmunks, squirrels, birds can often be quite detrimental to the garden, as you've learned. So if you've had experience, and everybody's ecosystem is different. I don't have chipmunks per se, but I have some other issues. Other people have chipmunks that they just have a really hard time growing because the chipmunks eat everything. And here is this remake cloth again. It really, like I says, has a million uses. And one of the things that I like to use it for, as far as the critters go, is during strawberry season. Who doesn't love fresh strawberries picked right off the plant? Who also eats those is all of the robins in my neighborhood. So I like to cover my strawberries with this material while my strawberries are forming and turning bright red. The thing about this too is that I don't need to take it off during any of those seasons. The light spectrums go through this material, and the water can also go through this material. So I don't need to remove it. I can grow all of my vegetables, all of my strawberries, for example, ripen them quite successfully under this material without having to remove it. So in your garden, if critters are becoming an issue, then we have to figure out how we can outsmart them. And this is a great way to do it. Remake cloth, if you've got it in your tool shed, there's a million different uses, and that turns out to be another one of them. So see if that doesn't help you. What else might you be having issues with critter wise? Anything else?
I was mostly thinking of birds, but we have a lot of birds. I don't know.
Yeah, and you know, they can early when your beans are coming up and your beans are beginning to open that first leaf. I don't know what it is about those things, but every bird in my neighborhood wants to come and pluck the tops off of my emerging beans, and that's a no-no. So I like to cover my bean rows early in the season with this remake cloth, just to give my beans a chance to germinate and start to grow while those birds are off doing something else and they can't get to it. So if you're finding that birds are doing something to your garden crops, this is often a really great way to alleviate that. So see if that can't work for you too.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Remake cloth, man, I forgot. It's got a jillion uses, and that's another one of them. So how are we feeling, you guys? You feeling empowered to get out there and grow some greens? I really hope that you are. If there's any other questions, we can sure get to them. If not, just remember, you're going to get a copy of this recording sent to your inbox. So if you missed out on any of it, you'll be able to do the replay. I'm also going to include in there a link for seeds, so that if you're looking for any garden seeds, things that you maybe got inspired today from our conversation to plant, then we will, you'll be able to go to that link and shop directly and get those delivered to your inbox. So that's a link that I'll also remember to include in that when I get that to you guys. I want to say thank you so much for being a part of this discussion today. You really warm my heart. I'm encouraged for humanity. We're learning to grow our food. And I'm really honored that you have showed up here and entrusted me to share what I know with you so that you can grow your food too. I really wish you a happy day. I wish you a wonderful early greens planting season. We will check back again. We've got another class planned in the works. Make sure you're on my email list so that I can get that information to you. And I will see you next time. You take care.